Hey, so we're on to video. I think it's, what number is this one? Anyway, I can't remember. There's lots going on the Toyota here, and I know in the last video we were talking about having the top of the cage work in and getting it strong and stuff, and so I just want to go over a little bit of what we're doing now with the drivetrain. There's been a bunch of little accessory stuff added onto the cage work now, so I want to show that off and kind of show you how that worked out with the jig that we were using in the last video for the light bar. And I happened to get a couple of solid days in on the chassis work, so we'll talk about that too. Let's have a look at where we're at. So this, obviously, you know, is a Class 2 truck, so we're using these Class 2 legal tires. And one of the things that I'm trying to do with the CMAX, of course, the whole point of the CMAX was to give you a legal class build with a C-channel frame. And the max part of a CMAX is that it's very easy to max out the points for SORCA events. And that's exactly what we ended up doing here. I started pointing out the way that this truck is going to be built. Pointing mean using the points scoring sheet to see where it's going to end up. And I came up with like 72 points, scale points, so that's a lot. One of the things that I want to do with all of my builds is try to get the best modeling representation of reality that I can. You know, I'm kind of into that. Part of that was to actually get a really nice realistic exhaust on it. The exhaust is a piece of 6mm tube that's got a 5mm ID. It looks super legit. Little tiny downturn here, and it fits underneath the bumper just nice. We got the muffler hanger on it, so it's all brazed up. The muffler is a 3D printed MagnaFlow, and it fits right on the tube right there. So that looks pretty cool. Actually, I think it's out of place a bit. Just slide it down a bit. And the single tube goes down here opposite the tranny, and then it turns into a Y harness. So I've got both of the exhaust pipes here in smaller, the collectors are smaller, and they run into this larger single tube. Now, the exclusive RC motor that I put in here is a really nice 3D printed job. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of detail. Because of where it is in the truck, I did very little finishing detail on it because there's no opening hood on this cabin yet anyways. So what I did is actually just kind of weathered it so it had a bit of a, you know, new-ish but well-used sort of a look. And Exclusive RC has the accessory pack screwed onto the front of the motor housing, so I took the accessory pack off and then I left it in its original sort of aluminum kind of look. Which works out really well. Now, the only thing I had to do on this, there were two changes I had to make to the Exclusive RC motor to fit it into the CMAX. The first thing that I had to change was I had to rotate the accessory pack. So I left the bottom pulley on the motor and left that in position, and then I actually had to rotate the accessory pack up a little bit like this and then put two new holes in it for the mounting screws here. So the accessory pack used to be lower, so the alternator here was actually hitting on the frame rail. So all I really did was just sort of rotate the whole thing and then re-drill the two screws, and I'm done. And the second thing I had to do was get rid of the Exclusive RC exhaust system that was on it, which was a good representation of this original motor. But I did put on the GCM Shapeways Store exhaust system, and these are the Block Hugger V8 headers, which, as you can see, don't touch the block, but they're very, very close. Even on our GCM block, it's the same way. And I had a suspicion that these headers would work perfectly, and they do, and they look great. And so those are the exhaust that meets up with the Y pipe underneath, and then the full exhaust all the way back. So the drivetrain is in. We have a 55 turn 3-pole motor in there. It's not a pole. Brett Parker corrected me on that the other day. I said it was a 5-pole motor, but it's not. It's a 5-slot. So this is a 3-slot, 55 turn, and then of course our very happy Bluebird 632 MGs that we love to use. Great servos there. And we have the SSD winch on there as well. So there's the drivetrain setup. You'll notice that the cage is off, of course, the whole cage is off, and we were talking earlier about having this cutout here for the transmission and the exhaust hoops and stuff, or the drive shaft hoop that'll have to go in. And now that the cage is off, we've been doing all the drivetrain work, and so I'm going to show you what's up with the cage work. This is basically ready to power up and go. I'll put the drive shafts on and put the motor wires on it, and the speed control and receiver and winch controller will plug in, and we're on the road. So that's in good shape. Now the cage work, you'll notice I have it kind of put together. I mean, it's sort of put together. This comes right off. There's a couple of good comments. Thanks guys for commenting on the YouTube channel about the build, because I think that's really great. I love your feedback and stuff, and that's great. It helps me out. But one of the questions was, how are you going to get the body off and the interior out and all that other stuff while this is supposed to be, you know, attached to the frame, and how are you going to do all that? Well, this body will forever and always just slide over top of the cage work. This is the way this is going to be forever. So there's no reason why this couldn't come off even after it's all assembled and whatever. There's going to end up being a plug for the two headlights and the trim rings, the trim lights here, the signal lamps. That'll have obviously wiring on it. And I might end up putting some magnetic wire tabs here on the body. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do for the wiring yet, but the only thing that will connect this to the rest of the truck is actually wiring. The rest of this is always going to be removable. So it'll have magnets to keep it down. Other than that, it'll just come off and on demand. So there's that. Now we talked about the cage work that went across the chassis earlier on. There was these tubes here that went across the truck. They used to go underneath the chassis, and you'll see here that we've cut them off. These tubes just had mounts soldered on it for the chassis mount, and so we just chopped them at the mount. And so now we have the left and right mount for the frame here and here. And of course these two front tubes, which were our setup tubes. There's mounts in the front here for the front frame, which goes right here on the front of the chassis, and then there's some more that are here on the back of the chassis. And you'll also notice that the bumper's on. So we wanted a double tube bumper, and the double tube the bottom tube here just stretches all the way across, and it's welded right into the chassis mount, so that's a nice solid mounting situation. What I am going to have to add on here is the D-ring loops. The D-ring loops will go on next. The top light bar mounts will go on next. And then we will add some toe ring mounts in the front here as well on the outside. You'll see I've got the light bars in and the front lights in. So these, whatever they are, SMD spots, 550s, 50s, what are they called? I forget what they're called. These lights are pretty cool. I'm not really sure what they are. They were actually made for a drone. They have a nice little hidden wiring harness underneath them, right there. And there's one screw that holds them on to the chassis on top, right there. And so that's it. That's how they bolt on. And they kind of aim down just slightly. They're stupid bright, so I didn't want to have them in your face when you're driving. Half the time the front end is, you know, in transit on the rough, so might as well have them down a bit. And then of course the top bar is in, and you'll see how this mounts too. Those tabs that we welded on with our little welding jig just sit right there, and then I poked a hole into the plastic to run the screw through the tab, and there you go. So there's a tab and the screw that goes into it. And other than that, the light bar is very rigid on its own, and it's pushing right up against the bottom of the bar anyways. And you'll notice here it has a very, 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 very tiny rake downwards, just a very tiny slope. so that the light will end up on the ground where it should be. So that's how the body comes off and on. It's quite simple. The entire attachment of the body to the chassis is actually only 8 screws. So the 8 screws are 4 on each side. We've got a front right here, and then there's this forward center frame, the rearward center frame, and the back of the frame rail right here, and that will be on both sides, and then you're done. These setup bolts, these setup bars right here that I was using in the very first videos to set up this tube work, these ones here are no longer being used for attaching the cage work to the chassis, and there's a reason for that, which I will show you right now. These tubes here, the setup tubes that are behind the front wheel, they actually take up this hole right here, which was, of course, now this hole is right where the motor plate sits, right there. So I actually can't put a screw in there any longer because the motor plate sits right there, and I could move the motor ahead or back a little bit. There's lots of adjustment here on the bottom of the chassis to move the drivetrain ahead or backwards. There's, I think, 12 holes here that you can set it to. I moved the drivetrain all the way to the back holes to pull this as far back as I could. That gives me a whole bunch of extra room in the front to actually build a proper radiator housing and stuff for the fan shroud and all that I'm going to build in the front. And it also lines up better with the body itself. So I wanted to have the back of the motor somewhere at the firewall, you know, so the position was kind of in line, and that's sort of how that worked out. So that's the reason I'm not going to use these 2 screw holes. No point in taking them off. They will be used for inner fender support when we start building the inner fenders in the truck. We will still use those for attaching the inner fenders, so they're a good thing to have. And we are well on our way now to getting this thing to be a roller. With that said, I'm going to see if I can just stick that cage work on and show you what that looks like, and then we'll start talking a little bit about where the interior is going to go. I'm just going to pull this winch out of the way here. And I will try to drop this on here. This should go on fairly easily. And we'll push that on at the front. And then we'll drop this down over the back frames. Like this. There. So, plus or minus a couple millimeters, we've actually got that attached now. I'll lift the camera up a bit here. So, you'll see here that these 2 tabs right here will just line up with the frame, and you put the screw in there and you're done. Boom, boom. In the front holes will actually screw right into the cross member that holds the winch, right into these holes, so that's super tough. And then in the back, these back holes here will also attach right into this cross member here, so that's super tough. And that means that all of the hardware on the truck will bolt in from the outside, and they're all easily accessible here. So we should have no issues getting this off and on later if we have to. And of course, because the body sits on the cage, not the frame, that will forever be available to go together or come apart. Now the interior, we kind of have 1,000 options here, because at this point here we need to start thinking about how to do the firewall and the tunnel cover, and then we're going to put in the floor pans here and get some seats made up and figure out how we're going to put all that in. Now my suggestion to get this going is that we actually have the floor pan and the interior as one separate piece, so that the body will come off and the cage will come out, and the interior will actually sit in the cage. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to pull this off again here, and I'll tell you what I mean about the interior fitting in the cage. So you'll see here that there's this big gap here where the frame goes. If I can manage to make the interior into a right side and a left side, then I should be able to take out the tunnel cover from the middle, and then be able to still get the left side or the right side out of the truck, because this is all open in the center here. So it should be serviceable pretty easily. I think we can make that work. And I'm actually pretty happy with that. I have a feeling it'll go together pretty simply. And so we have a lot of opportunity to put a center plate on this tunnel here, and even make the center plate stay with the truck. So that's another option, because of course if the cage only bolts onto the outsides on either side, then the center tunnel could actually stay there. And maybe that'll end up being a good option for mounting electronics in here or something else, so that we don't have to actually change this or the wiring. So hopefully that'll work. Still, of course, a lot more to do. We're not that far away from getting our Hey-OK stuff in. Of course, I've got new Hey-OK lighting that's going to go in the back here, because they make a really fancy off-road blinker kit to mimic something that we do in the full-size world, which is the orange and blue flashing off-road lights. So we're going to put those in and start on the interior work, and quite a big project actually. So looking forward to it. Thanks for watching.